our recording and up on Facebook. And yeah, it should be an interesting day today. We're hoping and praying that there'll be some type of solution for peace in Israel. It's a fitting day today because today is the commemoration of Yom HaZikaron, the day of Memorial Day, of remembering those who've died over the last 78 years in Israel in wars and in terror. So there's two separate sirens. I mentioned last week was Yom HaShoah. There was a siren for Yom HaShoah, 10 a.m. In Israel, Yom HaZikaron begins with a siren at nighttime when the day starts, as Jewish holidays do. And that's a commemoration. And then in the morning at 10 or 11 o'clock, there's another siren. But the two different sirens, one of them is for victims of terror, and the other one is for victims of war. And when you think about it, the fact that so many people are remembering victims of terror in that country, that they have to have a separate alert for that, it's kind of devastating. So again, we hope that there will not be a need to add so much space to Israel's military cemetery, Mount Herzl, Har Herzl, which we always go to. We always pay our respects to Har Herzl when we're there on our trips. It's a very important part of the experience. They take birthright groups there as well. Every birthright group has to go to Har Herzl, to Mount Herzl, which is Israel's Arlington, the equivalent of Arlington Cemetery. And yeah, it's a big deal in Israel, and as I've said many times, we should think about that in our country, doing something similar, which is having a Memorial Day before our Independence Day to recall the sacrifices that were made for this country, instead of just having a holiday that in a couple of weeks is going to kind of kick off the summer, and people really don't think about what it means. So in Israel, they definitely do, and it provides a really emotional beginning to what is a time of thinking about national sacrifice, national sovereignty, and what's at stake. And so there's obviously during the last few years, it's been a strange time to be there during that time. I haven't personally been there, but obviously I talk to Israel almost every day, and check in and find out what's happening, and yeah. And that's what's going on today. But I also want to tell people that Judith, are we dedicating today, or is it going to be next week? It's kind of up to you.
Next week.
All right. Okay. So next week. Well, that was fitting. I mean, I just didn't know the date. But today, then we will dedicate our study, and last week we dedicated in honor of few people, but Dave Watson definitely is still in our thoughts at this time of year. But yeah, this year we'll think about that. I'm going to put us up on Facebook, which I haven't. Any questions, comments, anything that people have to report on today? I'm going to just remind people that last week we were reading Genesis chapter 15. We read a story that's called the Covenant of the Pieces, which is famous from the standpoint, or is well known because it's a situation where Abraham is repromised, if you will, the fact that he's going to have many descendants. And I told you last week that I noticed, maybe for the first time, that the very first thing that Abraham does is say, in chapter 15, let me just go here real quick. Too far back. Um, God comes to Avram, still his name is Avram. We're going to get to the change of name today or next week. And he says to him, "Fear not, I'm your shield. You'll be very great." And he says back to God, right? Adonai, Adonai, Mati Tenli. What can you give me? Right? And I said, that's actually the first time that Avraham actually speaks and says something back to God. And I was kind of amazed by that because I don't remember anyone really pointing out to me the fact that Avraham's first words to God are essentially, God, what have you done for me? And I said I promised that I would look at the sources on this, like what are the traditional sources on it, and I didn't report that yet, right? I might have spoken to some of you about that, but I don't think I reported on that. Well, I couldn't have really because we haven't had class since then, but I haven't had a time to be together. But does everyone remember that? It's this word, these words. What can you give me?
I remember.
Right? So so yes, there are texts about this. And one of the one of the texts that I wanted to share, uh, the classical texts, the classical commentators from the Middle Ages in particular, though there are midrash about this, there isn't like a specific like quote that I can pull out, but the midrashic tendency is an interesting one. Well, actually, let me first say because Rashi and then Ramban Nachmanides, who's a Spanish Jewish rabbi. So Rashi was from France. Ramban lives a little later. Um, he's from Spain. They, of course, are not going to say Abraham doesn't really believe God. They're not going to say that. Um, they're not going to really hang anything too negative on Abraham at this point. They basically say, does anyone want to guess why they say Abraham says what he says here? Anybody want to give what you think might a traditional answer be this? Well, one of the things that Rashi says is that he's questioning God because he can't understand it, right? So he gives an answer. He goes, he doesn't just say, you haven't given me anything. He says, I'm going to have to make Eliezer my servant, my helper, whatever. He's going to be the guy that inherits everything because I don't have kids. So he's basically saying, I don't see how this is going to happen. Does anybody want to guess something else that they take away from this? Is an interesting one because I didn't see this coming. Anybody? Remembering that this is going to be basically a traditional answer in the sense that Avraham is not going to be he's not going to be faithless, right? So here's an interesting one. And this is from Ramban, from Nachmanides, and also from the Midrash to some extent. The reason that Avraham says this at this moment, according to them, this line of thought, is that Avram is not 100% sure that God is going to live up to this commitment because maybe he screwed up. That his merits aren't sufficient enough to actually achieve what God had said. I didn't see that coming. Makes sense in a way because you got to come up with a traditional answer that's not going to make God look bad and it's not going to make Avram look bad. So the answer is Avram thinks he screwed up, which of course he has, right? He's gone to Egypt. He had Sarah, go to Pharaoh, to save his life, that kind of thing. Maybe those things have made him not warranted. Like maybe he's screwed up. Everybody gets that?
Mhm.
And what's interesting about that, which of course is the takeaway from that, is that one of the things that makes people like Avram special, what makes these righteous people really righteous, is their uncertainty, not in God, but in themselves. right? This sense of, to some extent, self-deprecation and humility and uncertainty. Am I really, do I really still merit this blessing that God's told me, right? So this is, to some extent, Avram saying, maybe you're not delivering this anymore because I don't deserve it. So that's the traditional kind of way of understanding this, which okay, I get it. I mean, I think that's kind of a nice thing, is that, people who even people who seem to be doing good things should never be like walking around going, "Hey, I'm cool with God. God's giving me all these blessings because I deserve it," right? There's this kind of feeling like, "Hey, I'm not so sure of myself." Um, the more modern answers, right? So, in the last like 50, 60 years, kind of the modern takeaways, and one of them is Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was himself influenced by Martin Buber and Kierkegaard and kind of existential philosophers, but not in the kind of the dark um, Ingmar Bergman way where you're like life is crushing, and it was more like I would say to some extent a celebratory existentialism, if you could. Heschel writes about radical amazement and the fact that we're here, the fact that we're in God's world and there's things all around us that we can like look at and go, that's a beautiful dawn, right? Uh, that is amazing, and we should be filled with joy and recognition and an appreciation for these things, right? And so Heschel said about Avram that this is a dialogue between an example of the best kind of dialogue between God and humanity. And so you can kind of see again that Buber I thou type of focus, which is one that he takes to another level, Heschel, where he says, when we have faith, and he's going to take the traditional line that Avram still has faith here, not, hey, God, I don't believe you anymore, which the reason I'm saying this is I can kind of see that in what Avram's saying is, God, what do you expect me to do? But but Heschel says that questioning God is not an act of disbelief or it's not a rejection of God. Engagement with God is one of those parts of faith. It's a relationship. It's an act of of closeness rather than rebellion or disengagement. To question God, in a sense, is to take God seriously. And so that's what Heschel says. And then Nahum Sarna, who wrote, was a professor who passed away about 20 years ago, but he was from the East Coast, he got his degree from Dropsy, but Sarna wrote two really great commentaries on Genesis and Exodus. And his son, Jonathan Sarna, is really the preeminent historian on American Jewish experience. He's written about Lincoln. I think he's written about all the presidents in almost in the Jewish community. But Jonathan Sarna is his son. But Nahum wrote a really great Genesis commentary, really great Genesis commentary. It still holds up as one of the preeminent commentaries. And kind of along Heschel's line, says this is a pattern that we have in the Bible with our leaders, with our prophets, with the people who represent us with God. God says something to them, calls them. The human being, and oftentimes this is a prophet. They question, they question God. They do something or say something. Moses does it at the burning bush. Jeremiah and some of the other prophets, are saying, God, why are you doing this to me? And what it does is it leads to a deeper covenant. It leads to a deeper relationship. And so what Avram does here is what many of the Jewish leaders that we look to as kind of the spokespeople for and the representatives between all humans and God, they don't just listen to the direction. That's what Noah did. Avram doesn't do that. And we're going to see that again, of course, in a couple chapters in the very famous scene where we see the Sodom and Gomorrah. So again, in the modern era, when we can start to kind of like understand that questioning is not faithlessness, challenging God is not an act of rebellion, we start to see that in the modern era as a way of understanding the way that our biblical role models interact with God. And to some extent, like the highest level are those confrontations, if you will. So um there you go. Any other questions? But thank you, everybody, for
It,
allowing me to dig deeper on that question, which I definitely affected me. I mean, don't I definitely connected with that in a way that I hadn't before. Yeah.
it's like Abraham's saying to God, you have a role, you have a deeper role to play as well. It isn't all on me.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Jewish tradition allows us to say, which is, okay, God, well, what does that really mean? Like, okay, you made a broad promise. Let's qualify this, right? Let's qualify this. So, and of course, Avram actually has an answer. Avram literally says to him, "Hey, if you're not going to give me no, if I don't have offspring, um, oh, Judith just told me that her sister went on a date with Jonathan, and that he's a little arrogant. Yeah, I shouldn't have said that out loud. But thank you, Judith. I thought you did have some interactions with Jonathan Sarai, the family did. Anyways, um,
I
so
think I think to qualify that and take some of the negative sting out of it was, I think if I remember correctly, she said he sort of had justification to be a
okay.
little arrogant.
Well, I haven't interacted with him. My dad did a long time ago, and I mean, nothing ever came to fruition on it. But I think well, I'm not sure. I don't know. They talked about some kind of project, and but anyways, I'm glad there's somebody like Sarna that's researching and publishing and bringing out the American Jewish experience. So, um, yeah, if you're interested in that, that's the guy. That's the guy to go to. He's probably 72, 73, something like that now. Anyway, so he's not like, he's speaking and teaching a lot now, and not so much in the university setting anymore. I think he was at Brandeis for most of his career. I'm pretty sure that was the case. Anyways, so now we're going to read chapter 16, because the rest of 15 was essentially, and it was not a very long chapter, just to remind everybody, was Avram being told, no, you're going to be um your children are going to be very numerous, and you look in the heavens, if you can count the stars, that's how many kids you're going to have. And earlier it was, all the sand on the shore, that's your descendants. So God's given him a couple of analogies, but we didn't talk about this. So the sacrifice, the fact that the animals are cut and God as a flame goes through them is interesting. But we didn't really talk about this too much, which is this really weird line in Genesis, which is definitely foreshadowing, but it's not, it's very specific, it's very specific, and yeah, it's not, there's no mystery to it. God says your descendants are going to be strangers in a land that's not theirs and will be oppressed there, right? Uh, he says, of course, you will die of old age and it'll be okay for you, but your offspring are going to be slaves. Um, of course, the story of Egypt. Now, people forget about this part because they want to forget about this part. They write this out of their memories. You know why, right?
It
There's
doesn't
not,
seem like a great deal, you know. Yes,
yeah,
you're going to have a zillion children, but they're going to be slaves.
yeah, it's not, it's not a great piece of information to have to say with, right? You know, I mean, the good news is that they're going to be able to eventually get out,
Mhm.
but being told this
What kind of God
is,
lets that happen?
yeah, and the bigger issue is it's done. And people get, again, I'm just going to say from the Jewish perspective, generally speaking, we don't like to be told this is the way it's got to be. This is your destiny. This is your fate. That, and again, you could say, well, Avram has been told he's going to have numerous kids. That's his destiny. That's his fate. But it's a very general and kind of, well, there's not a lot of, you're going to have a lot of kids, a lot of descendants, and there's going to be so many of them you can't. And then 6 million are going to be murdered in the Holocaust over, a period of about 10 years. That part also wasn't there. The idea that the bad stuff that's included in this, it's tough and it's hard. And we don't like the idea that this is the way it's got to be, that it's fated and it's not, you can't get out of it. And, um, and it's not, yeah. I mean, as Rosemary said, you're being told your family's going to go through a lot of suffering, hundreds of years of suffering. Now, I will tell you the rabbinic understanding of this is that we came up shy on the 400 years. So God granted us a reprieve for some of that time, which when they added it up, they said, well, we weren't quite slaves for 400 years. Cut out a little bit here, and we got a reprieve, if you will. But is this because we're going to be punished for something? Is it punishment for what Abraham did by, I mean, that's one of the rabbinic traditional, like 2,000 years of, like, that's what Abraham got for going down to Egypt and running this scam on Pharaoh. This is what happens. But, like, doesn't the Bible say we don't punish? I mean, it does say in one place we punish children for their parents, but then in another place we don't. Um, Now, look, we, I mean, based on the fact that the authorship of this would have been about the 8th century BCE, you could say, hey, this was written 400 years after the slavery and then Exodus. It's 400 years after Moses lived that this was written. So somebody could have written this because they wanted you to know, or they believed that this was a foregone conclusion. This was Israel's destiny to be slaves. Not exactly the way maybe you or I would like it to have been, that this was just the way it was. It was going to happen. But, for this author, no issue, no deal. It's not a problem. These kind of things are foretold and must have been written into the script, if you will. So I don't want to dismiss this by saying, hey, this is just somebody saying what God must have had this as a plan. This must have been part of the plan. But we also know this, because the text told us this. They are going to return back to the land of Canaan because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete, which is God telling Abraham, I can't kick them out yet. They haven't, if you will, what it says, they haven't been bad enough yet. The Canaanites haven't quite squandered all their chances yet. And so you're going to have to go through a cooling out period, or not really a cooling out period, but you have to go through a waiting period before you can come in and have the land. It's not ready for you yet. So, yeah, that's what the Bible says. It's not an interpretation. That's what it says right there. I mean, you could talk about, and there are interpretations of why does God wait so long, especially since he knows they're going to be bad, which then again gets to the question that God doesn't judge us for our intention or even to some extent for our destiny. We have to do it. You know what I'm saying? It's the old, can you go back and kill the Hitler baby? You know, Bible seems to at least, and I would say Jewish tradition seems to be that you got to you can't do that ahead of time. So there is that. Those two things go together, right? You, your descendants are going to go through hell, but there's nothing I can do. And again, the middle section here, verse 15 is, but you, Abraham, don't have to worry about it. You're gonna live a long life, which I don't know. Somebody told me that my great great grandchildren were going to have to be slaves and live through hell. I don't know that God telling me, but you're going to die of old age. I don't know that I'm going to walk away feeling great after that. Me personally, I would have probably said, you know what? Is there any way I can negotiate with this a little bit? I'll not necessarily live a ripe old age, but can you make my great great grandkids not have to be slaves? Is there some negotiation here? I don't know. But I don't know. The consolation here. And of course we've seen it we've seen it for those who are reading the book of Kings with us, you know, we've heard the same thing that was promised to King Hezekiah. You're not going to lose the kingdom, but your descendants will. And he didn't seem to care. So this idea that, don't worry, you'll be okay, will make somebody feel better. There are other cases of this in the Bible. But yeah, this idea that this is already there, um, yeah. So it's a reaffirmation of the covenant that God had already made with Abraham back to, I mean, literally, that was chapter 12. This is chapter 15. It's not that far away, but many, many years could have passed. I mean, it could have been 40, 50 years, honestly, because Abraham is about 100 when he has his kids. So, and he's no spring chicken when he's not 15 or 20 years old when he comes to the land of Canaan in the first place. So this is all understandable based on his age. And I'll give you one other thing to think about. I don't have an answer because this is definitely one of those unanswerable questions. If God told you, if God told you that you were going to live to a ripe old age, how would that change your life?
I don't know. I've already lived to a ripe old age.
I don't have an answer. I honestly, I
Well,
have no
that's the
answer.
subject of millions of philosophies and novels. I'm reading a book, rereading a book called Measure, which is just about that and what happens. If you know you're going to live to a ripe old age, I you live your
That's
life.
why yeah, in Greek mythology, the fates were so powerful and so scary. It was because they knew they had measured out your line already.
Yeah.
Well, in
Uh,
mythology and fairy tales, it usually doesn't work out very well for the person to know that. They screw themselves up and then they're stuck with this ruined immortal life
Every single
every
time.
single time.
yeah, it doesn't work usually well. I will tell you that you can make the argument too that Abraham has already shown, if we're going to take the traditional answer here, maybe he's not so sure that it's gonna happen because again, that at least the traditional answer, which is, but maybe I screwed up. Maybe that promise has been taken away from me. Uh, is it could be there as well. Like maybe I maybe that agreement isn't in effect anymore. Um, I don't know. So you could make that argument too. Yeah, God, you promised me a lot of kids. I don't have any kids. You promised me a long life. I'm still not gonna eat and drink everything I want, or I'm still not gonna race sports cars, at excessive speeds, or jump out of airplanes. But yeah, I mean, it would it would uh, it would definitely freak you out if God told you you're living a long time. But yes, by this point, Avraham already probably has lived a long time. But um, so that's what we read, and now we'll read a little bit more because now for something completely different, as they would say, Monty Python. This especially for an older gentleman like Avraham is going to be, I was going to say a twisted love story, but I don't know that at least in some of these situations, love has anything to do with it. Yes, this would be to quote the other great, uh, great philosopher. What's love got to do with it? Yes. Um. Anyways, so Rosemary, would you like to tell us the story of Hagar?
Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Avram, "Look, God has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a child through her." And Avram heeded Sarai's request. So Sarai, Avram's wife, took her maid, Hagar the Egyptian, after Avram had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband Avram as concubine.
Yeah, I will tell you. So let's just do these couple verses so far because needless to say, these three verses are vitally important in understanding Avram's life, Sarai's life, and to some extent the future of not only Jewish history, but of the Arab world. Because again, this child, Ishmael, will be the ancestor of the Arab people and then by extension, Muslims. So this is very important for some people. Gosh, it's plays out every day what we see here in the sense that like the legacy to this is still something that we we place and through the lens and through the kind of the mindset of this goes back to the Bible. So you just read this, you read the setup to this, right? This is 100% instigated by Sarai. It's Sarai trying to fix a problem, which is that she can't have children. Um, I will say that it's clear that Hagar is her maidservant, not his. So the assumption is that this wasn't something that was going on before. She's called a shifcha, which is a handmaid. But when she says to him and gave to her husband Avram as a concubine, Mary, do you want to tell us what the King James says in the last word of of verse 3?
Wife.
Yeah. It says Isha. So the King James retains at least a more accurate translation, literal translation of the Hebrew. Clearly, this is an arrangement of necessity. I would say convenience, but it's really necessity in Sarai's eyes. Sarai is like, I need to have a kid. And the only way I'm going to have a kid is through my handmaid. What Hagar meant to Avram, we'll read a little bit more. But at least at this stage, this is not Avram's idea. This is her idea. And it says, Vayishma. He heard her. He listened to her. He heeded her. I'm fine with that translation, heeding. He acknowledged her. He did what she said. So,
Mark,
yes.
does Isha, is it ever translated anywhere else as just woman as opposed to wife?
Yeah, yeah. But yes, but clearly in the context here, he didn't give
I'm
her to
not
be a
disagreeing.
woman. I
Yeah.
mean,
So why then did whoever this translation is, why did they switch from wife to maid?
because because they decided to give you their interpretation and their feeling of what this was. Yeah, they jumped to the next that they do all the time. Translators want you to they this is what they've decided. They've decided that it should be concubine or consort or whatever
The word
you know,
is.
whatever they want to use. But yeah, there's no legitimate reason that you could say other than the interpretation. This is their interpretation. That's the only way you could say it. And from the context, which I'm fine with. I mean, but I want you to know that's not what it says. And again, did that change Avram's expectation of what's going to happen here? I don't know. Now, look, we know for a fact this is an interpretation that Hagar is Mitzrit. That's what it says. She's an Egyptian. The assumption is this is one of the women that Avram got for, we used the word pimping before, um, whatever word you like for the Egyptians. Hagar came back in that deal. It was part of that trade, if you will. It's more of a sports reference. But by the way, by the way, part of the lesson from that, of course, is that be careful what you get, right? Now I would say what you asked for, but what he got in that doing what he did with his wife is he winds up with a consort who ends up becoming, I wouldn't say an impediment to the relationship, but definitely complicates things. Okay, so interesting how, at least from one of the midrashic kind of ideas here, is that because Avram did that with Pharaoh, he winds up sowing the seeds of his own familial discord because of that, right? There was a comeuppance, if you will, here, which it wouldn't have been there. Now you can make the argument she might have other handmaids that were not Egyptian, and it doesn't say she 100% came from Pharaoh, but kind of makes sense. Maybe he spent some money. Maybe he bought her in Egypt. Maybe she was Egyptian living in the land of Israel when he was making and bringing together other people into his household. So it doesn't say that she was part of the deal with Pharaoh, but that's kind of where people have gone in making that connection. And as the Midrash kind of reminds us, be careful. You think you got a great deal from that, maybe not. Maybe this whole thing wouldn't have happened if Avram hadn't gone there in the first place. So, any questions, comments on this first part of the scene? It's not, like I said, this is not an easy thing to read. One could again make the argument Avram and now Sarai are like going, hey, God, I can't wait around for you anymore. I'm going to take matters into my own hands and I'm going to get something done. So it's another way of understanding this. All right. Anything?
You know what? I find it very interesting. This is a very complicated way to start, right? It's not an easy puzzle to put together.
Are you
So
saying Avram in general or this story?
this story, this scene, in other words, it's God's God. He could have made it very simple, right? There's no reason for this scene to even ever happen. So I almost want to peel back the layers of the onion and find out, what were people thinking back then? Why this even like what is the deeper point of this? What's the deeper meaning? What
Well,
why
well,
why did God make Sarah infertile?
yeah.
Why was it a challenge? Was it a challenge to see how Avram would he do this? Would he consort with someone other than the person he agreed to be his wife? I mean, was it a character test? What? It's got to go deeper
All
than this.
Well, wait a second. All of those are possibilities in the traditional midrash. All of these are pieces of the what we have as possibilities. And again, we have conflicting midrashim, right? You've seen that with possibilities of who these people are, what their makeup is. Part of what we're left with Sarai, and of course we're going to see this with Rebecca and Rachel. The only one of the matriarchs who doesn't seem to have any problem having kids is Leah. But of the three matriarchs who you could make the argument were supposed to be, Leah is like a bonus wife that Jacob didn't even ask for, right? Of the line of the women, right, of Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel, they can't have kids. And every time they have kids, as we're going to see, God has to like do something. So this infertility issue is going to be an issue in Genesis. And it's compounded by the fact that again, for Avram, he's already been told he's going to have kids, but his wife is infertile. And it seems again, that is genetically, biologically, physically the situation. She's an older woman by now who has stopped, as we're going to see. I don't want to jump the gun, but trust me, all that stuff is here. But what also is very interesting, and again, to some extent, the Midrash doesn't belabor this point, but I think if we were going to do a modern Midrash on this, I think there'd be some level, and again, I haven't read every, and by the way, Fox is just doing, I don't, when's it's coming out? The Matriarchs, it's coming out. Has it come out? It's coming out. I don't know. They were running commercials for it during something I was watching recently. They're doing a series on the matriarchs, biblical, you know, fiction. Somebody, am I? I'm not dreaming this, right? There is a matriarch thing coming out on Fox.
Uh,
Please, somebody else? Yes?
I might
No?
have
It's
seen
already
I might have
happened.
seen
I'm
an
looking.
ad.
I am no, I'm
It
sure it's either
says, yeah, they have a new show, and let me see when it comes up. It's not telling
The
me.
I haven't
Faithful
seen it.
Women of the Bible. The
Okay,
Faithful
right.
Women of the Bible, 3-week, 3-part biblical drama on Fox. It already
Okay.
premiered.
On what day?
We'll see what the agenda
Premiered
is.
March 22. The series highlights
I like the fact that John we'll see what the agenda is. I agree with you, John. I haven't seen it. I haven't pre-screened it. I don't know if it's any good at all. I will
this.
tell you that I like the fact that they're focusing on the women because, no one's really focused on the women. They did
This
a they did an adaptation of The Red Tent a few years ago. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was horrible. And
didn't see it.
what? You never saw it?
No, I never saw it.
It's such a great book that,
It's such a great book.
you don't want to see an adaptation that's not going to be great. It's not great. Well, it's good. I mean, it's solid. I don't think it's bad. It's actually, it was pretty good. Anyways, matriarchs, obviously, we don't have a lot of text on them, but we do have some. And so, let's imagine it and even though a lot of the commentators, obviously, over the years have been men, look, let's remember that in the Midrash and to some extent it's in the Torah, right? This is a beautiful woman that's so beautiful that the Egyptians have to deliver her to the Pharaoh. So let's assume that this woman is a beautiful woman, like a beautiful woman and is aged beautifully. The there is an there is an irony here, which is that this beautiful woman can't have children. She wants children. This isn't a beautiful woman who, like some beautiful women that we see today, and they have every right not to want to have children. They don't want to have children. That's just not what they want to do. This woman wants a child so badly, and she's a beautiful woman.
But it's also a common theme in literature slash fairy tales slash whatever, that the beautiful woman, the woman who's wanted, can't be the wife, can't be the mother, the what's expected of her. She's got beauty, but she doesn't get
Asked out
fertility or brains or money or whatever,
or asked out.
or
Yeah.
asked out. Right.
Well,
That's just
she's
all those Grimm's fairy tales that start out there once was a king and a queen, and they were happy, and their only sorrow was they had no child.
yeah.
But wait, wait,
This
wait, wait,
is
wait, but wait, right, no, no. Okay, I get that. I get that point. This God tells Abraham, you're going to have, you know, as many stars in the sky,
yeah.
right? Yet the woman that he marries can't do it. It's deeper than that, though. I mean, this is in Genesis. I mean, it should be a fairy tale, right? Where they have children, plenty of. It's just to me, it's like I said a couple minutes ago. There's something deeper here going on.
There is,
You've got three characters, right?
and there is something deeper going on, which is why this story is such an important part of who we are, our consciousness. And you can imagine that throughout Jewish history, every mother who lost a baby, who was losing every baby that she had because they didn't understand about RH factor, or every person who, could have had a baby today that, that 50 years ago, some
It was
literal
the mortality
assumption.
rate for babies was something like half, you know?
Yeah. So you can understand how a woman who was infertile, who now can have, a hormone injection and have a baby, which is a miracle. Any woman who's infertile, who's been treated by science, believes in miracles. And you can understand how Sarah and then Rebecca and then Rachel are examples for them because they will do anything to have a child. They'll spend any amount of money. They'll go anywhere in the world to try to figure out how to have a child. And that's what Sarah does. Avram is doing it too. Avram's telling God, this guy's going to be this guy. He's not my son, but it'll work. And Sarah is literally watching as her body ages past when she can have a kid. And so what is she thinking? I got to fix this. I got to solve this. So she's trying to fix it. And that is a very powerful human emotion. It's a very powerful, it's so human. I mean, it's so like, this is like the basic level of humanity. This is why it's not a fairy tale. Because, and again, I know you're going to say, well, fairy tales have lessons too, but it's not just like this is about courage or valor or not giving up. This is a human being acting like a human being, trying to come up with a solution, even a bad solution. I'm just, and the crazy thing is, they have been told by God that this is going to happen. And yet, I don't know. So the question is I mean, one of my takeaways is if God told you with no uncertainty that something was going to happen, the takeaway from here, at least one of the takeaways for me is it doesn't matter. I am not going to wait around and I'm not going to say, hey, maybe this is what God meant. Because that's what these two, our ancestors, the ancestors of every Jew, did. They tried to fix the situation, even though God told them what the answer was. So I don't know. Avram, Sarah, models of faith, all the stuff. I mean, Fox is calling it faithful women for a reason. But hello, even with that knowledge, and I wouldn't even say it's faith, God told them. So it's like you know it. I don't faith. I don't have to believe it. God told me. They
But that,
still don't know.
yeah, but that um push to do it ourselves for humans to go, all right, God said this, but it's not happening, is is evident in our theology as Jews. We don't
Yeah.
pray for we don't pray for a pony. We pray for the strength to either earn a pony or or deal with not getting a pony. It's a different, I mean,
Well,
that's a really
you
basic
can, yes,
example,
but
but
no, but
we
you can
I
go
pray
even
think
for,
you can
that's
go
kind
even
of
further.
modern.
God's told them that they're going to get a pony, and they
right,
still are going to do
right.
everything they can to get the pony as quick as, or not as quick as possible, but I'm going to do anything I can to get that pony. I know God told me, but maybe this is what God meant by it. That's why this is so powerful. That's why this is so real. This is why when I read this, I'm like, oh yeah, this is me. This is every human that I've ever met doesn't, even if we have faith and not even faith, knowledge, it's not going to change our desire to try to make it happen. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you other than, gosh, this is like human behavior. That's who we are. That's why this is not a fairy tale. This is not, this is, yeah, miracles are happening. God's talking to people, but meanwhile, they are us. This is every human being that I've ever met.
I'm not so sure that this stuff is so cra bizarre, crazy, bizarre. We haven't even gotten to three, four, and five. That I'm not sure this is. You're supposed to be sober discussing this.
Well, good thing I'm not. No,
Oh,
I will tell you, it is
It's and when we first read it long ago, right? You go through it so quickly. Uh,
yep, and we're not meant to because there is a whole lot here. As I said, I can't tell you how many times I've read it. Every time, not every time, but every time I really can do a deep dive into it, I come away with something else that just blows my mind. So,
Was Hagar a Zoroastrian?
No, there's no explanation of, I mean,
She was
Proto-Zoroastrianism by this
Egyptian.
point,
She probably, you know, believed
Zoroaster
in
hadn't lived
Akhenaten
yet.
or one of those
Yeah,
gods.
Zoroaster hadn't lived yet, but there are Egyptian folks, as Rosemary said, what we know about from the archaeology and what we know about from kind of the Egyptian literature, some of it we goes back, pretty far. They're worshiping Ra and Horus and Isis. They're worshiping a pantheon of Egyptian goddesses, um, and gods and goddesses. So, um, who, by the way, behave somewhat differently than Babylonian gods and goddesses, but maybe you could say they act Egyptian. Um, all right, so let's take a look at a little bit more.
Rabbi, one question.
Yeah.
Is Sarah's act of giving her handmaiden to Abraham, is that a selfish act or is that an altruistic act?
Well, that's for you to decide, and maybe you'll decide it a little bit more as we read it. But up till now, or for what we've read, you know, and I'll tell you that there's differences, there's different midrashic feelings here. One is that she's trying to force God's hand, which is on her. The other one is that she's trying to come up with solutions. She's trying to figure out a way to bring God's word into being. And so, there's also this idea that Sarah's not going to screw up. So she did what she did out of necessity. So there's differences of opinion on the tradition on this. One of the problems that we have in the traditional sources is that Avram and Sarah really can't do anything wrong. So when it comes to that, the traditional sources allow for a little bit of, maybe a gradation of real weakness. But for the most part, at least when it comes to once we get into Noah, they're a little bit more critical of because he's not Hebrew and he's not our ancestor. He is our ancestor, but he's everybody's ancestor. So if you look around and you look at those guys, well, Noah's his ancestor. That Noah had some real flaws. Avram can't have as many flaws because he's our ancestor. So that's a little bit of a challenge in the traditional sources. They're not going to be really critical of Avram until you get more modern commentaries on this. But generally speaking, because what you also have to keep in mind, what Sarai did, and again, even if we're saying the authorship of this is the 8th century, nothing she does here is out of the ordinary from the standpoint of like, who the hell does this? No, that's not what anyone would have said. They would have said this is a dramatic and kind of like the last ditch effort to have a kid, but this was completely legal. This was completely ethical. This was completely acceptable in that society. So no one would have said, "Hey, she's out of line here." He'd be like, "Oh, she didn't really have a choice." But yeah, you got to look at it from that. And by that I'm saying, like in that time in that culture, this was this was what people did. Did they do it a lot? Probably not, because they did understand about biology. They did understand about genetics. They did understand that they didn't exactly understand it, but they did know that the mother and the father did have something to do with the way the child would look and the way the child would behave. Generally speaking, again, it was the father that's kind of doing that, but they did understand that there's something different here if the mother is not the mother. So this was not ideal, but it was acceptable. So we'll keep that in mind too. And when we read it through our lens, this is like, especially I think, kind of what John is saying, this is insane, right? This is like, who does this? Well, people did do this. And we'll read a little bit more.
Wait. But even when sorry, I hate to say this, but now is the child Jewish? Is it Egyptian? So now are we all? Did they
They
immediately
were
convert? I mean,
No,
They
no,
were
no, we're
still
not.
patrilineal, though.
Yeah, yeah. This is still patrilineal descent. This is still, if the child was Avram's child, it would have been Hebrew. It would have been Jewish, if you will. Yeah, not the mother, because
Oh, okay.
it's not until the Roman era that we move to matrilineal descent. It's still everybody in the Bible. Remember, you know, I think Solomon was one of the few Jewish kings to have a Jewish mother, an Israelite mother, Bathsheba. Most of the Israelite kings later on, including Rehoboam, Solomon's son, they start marrying foreign women, and every one of those kings after Solomon has foreign blood in them. Every single one of them. Every one of them. So, I mean, sometimes they marry Israelites, but a lot, the normal thing. And so there was no issue with it. Everybody knows that. I mean, Moses marries a Midianite. So what,
Okay.
this is not going to be some, and of course, Judah, our ancestor, marries a Canaanite well, doesn't marry her, but has children with a Canaanite. Oh, my, my friends, this is just scratching the surface of things that will blow your mind in the book of Genesis when it comes to procreation. I promise you, this is nothing. This, compared to some of the later stories, is a walk in the park. This is a normal relationship. All right, so let's
Huh.
read another few lines, Rosemary.
He cohabited with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem. And Sarai said to Abram, "The wrong done me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. God decide between you and me." Abram said to Sarai, "Your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right." Then Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from her.
Uh, Now we're going to have two kind of versions of this
One
story.
of two stories here, yeah.
Yeah, we're
Well,
going to have two versions of this. But this first version that we have here is, hmm, yeah, it's pretty mind blowing. Um, but also again very human, right?
In clause four, does 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 that insinuate something other than consent?
What do you mean?
Her mistress was lowered in her esteem. Okay,
Yeah.
so she
She's
felt
just, I always read it that she was kind of, hey,
She
I'm
looked at
pregnant, you're not.
she started looking down on her boss, right? She
Oh,
started looking down on her
well,
boss.
well, he cohabitated with Hagar.
Yeah.
Isn't isn't necessarily saying that okay, a slave, right? She has no choice, but come on. I mean, did he rape her? Was it consensual? I mean,
Look,
she had
you know,
lower
Y'all are
esteem. I mean,
y'all are applying
yeah.
modern sensibilities to a story. She was given
No,
to him as a
of course, but there is an interesting question here, which is
consent is
there is an interesting issue here, folks, which is what is the relationship? And I will tell you this, and Judith, you probably know this, or you might remember any of you who know the Midrash. The relationship that Hagar and Abraham has is not necessarily as straightforward as I'm talking about in the traditional sources. In the traditional sources, maybe not even in the text itself, but in the Midrash, there is there develops, let's say, genuine affection between Hagar and Abraham. The which means that to some extent the rabbis didn't feel comfortable, I would say. Maybe this is my modern sensibility on this, but at least they made a backstory where Hagar and Abraham are together again after Sarai dies. So that seems to me to be a pretty heavy implication that there's actually a relationship here that didn't necessarily exist, but that even 2,000 years ago, we didn't like the idea that this woman was simply used. They're definitely in the text itself here in these few verses. there seems to be a dynamic which, at least to some extent, allows for Hagar to have, I'm just going to say, a certain level of bearing while she's pregnant, which is, however it plays out, she's not treated like a piece of trash. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. I'm not defending this. I'm not saying people should do this. I'm not saying that this is an adequate solution for infertility. Don't try this at home, is what I'm saying. but, but, but something happens here, which is not, it's just not just the woman was a machine. Okay. Because you wouldn't have had these emotions. You wouldn't have these feelings if that was the case. Okay. Please. I mean, just read the text. Her projection, well, it's not even a projection. It says her mistress was lowered in her esteem, which means that Hagar might have said something, or if she didn't say anything, she conveyed to Sarai that that the power dynamic had shifted. Okay. Now, of course, Sarai's reaction to this is insane, but also very human, which is your wife just blamed you for something that she did.
Mhm.
This was her. You wanted to go here, right? You took me here, and now you're blaming me for what happened when we got here. That's what just happened. This is your fault. The Hebrew, the Hebrew is a little bit stronger, by the way. The translation softened this a little bit. What does the King James say, Mary, for verse 5? Must be stronger than this. The wrong done me?
I was despised in her eyes.
No, before that. Sarai said to
My
Avram,
my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes.
yeah, okay. So that's the translation. The literal translation is ekalbe na, which is,
Oh, so
which is
Hagar
her,
was disdainful of Sarah.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah. So according to this, that was real. It wasn't just her projection. It wasn't just her in her mind, right? That her mistress was lowered in her esteem. Maybe she looked at her wrong. Maybe she said something to her. There's something going on here, which has changed the power dynamic. But again, the takeaway is, to me, is that the wife blames the husband for what she wanted to do in the first place. Wasn't Avram's idea, and at the very least, I guess the takeaway to some extent is, yeah, be careful. If even if you're following your wife's directions, if you're going to be held liable for it afterwards, I don't know how you can get out of this. I really don't know. I mean, Avram is kind of in a corner here. And his answer is essentially probably, look, modern commentators say that Avram, this is a cop out, right? This is Avram not doing what he should have done, which is protect Hagar. But at the end of the day, he basically is saying, look, you do what you think you got to do, but this is, that's all he says. This is your call, which is probably, in all fairness and human dynamic, it's probably the only thing he could really do. I mean, what's he going to do? Tell her, sorry. I mean, he could have. This was your idea, and now you got to deal with the consequences of this. This is what you wanted. He doesn't do that because what he's basically saying is, whatever you do, that's on you. Yeah. And, you know, the traditional, I mean, look, the text is what it is. The text says that. But he doesn't quite say treat her bad, right? He doesn't say, well, you know, act out, act out your anger on her. He actually says that the Hebrew phrase, deal with her as you think right, carries the understanding of asila hatov, right? But of course, the rabbinic explanation is he kind of says to her, not do what you think is right, but do what's right, right? Consider the fact that this woman just did what we wanted her to do, which is to, be a surrogate. So the word tov doesn't imply, I mean, again, it could be just do what you think you should do, what's good to you, but do what's right, right? So she did what she thought was right and treated her like garbage. Um, what do you think?
I think that Sarah was acting, her anger was built on her own shame. And I think that the messiness that's coming from this is another midrashic lesson that they should have been more patient and let God do the work.
Yeah. And that is definitely one of the traditional takeaways from this is what happens when people force God's hand and try to and try to do it themselves. This is a solution, but it's not a good solution, and it's what we piece together.
So in other words, it was a test.
Well, that's
But based
another
on what
level.
Floyd is saying,
No,
it's
no,
it
it's
was
another
it,
no, it's another level to it. It doesn't have to be a test. It could be, again, it didn't say God said, "Hey, Abraham, figure this out." It's human beings being human beings, and we could say after. I only say this, John, because we do have, as we're going to see in a few chapters, Genesis chapter 22, when we have the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, God says right off the bat, this is a test. Now, I'm not saying it's not a test because the traditional midrash also says that these are tests that God had, that God gives him. He gives him a test of the famine. He fails it. He gives him a test of having the infertility of Sarah. He fails. Say fails it. He doesn't have faith, right? He doesn't wait it out. He doesn't have patience. He doesn't, you know. So there is that understanding that these were trials that he had to go through. Uh, the trials of Abraham. It is, by the way, like kind of the Midrash is somewhat based on the trials of Hercules, except these are Jewish trials, right? These are like, you've gone on a trip and you didn't pack your toiletry bag, I'm not saying it's not saying that Hercules trials were, well, some of those were life threatening. Avram's trials are oftentimes life threatening in a way, but they're also more emotional
They're
trials.
more moral challenges than
Yes,
Hercules's
than
were.
Herculean. But it's interesting that there's 10 of them, that there's
Yeah.
like there's, so I always thought, hey, you rabbis, you did that midrash on Hercules. I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure that this was their version of it. But then you have ones that aren't even in the Bible that were just established midrash, like Nimrod, putting him in a furnace. So they went back in Avram's life to stuff that's not in the Torah, and also before this. But this is one of them, and yeah, keep that in mind that this is part of human beings dealing with a reality where they're confronted with, well, do I have to? I got to take matters in my own hand. So, look, I think most of us would say today that Sarah doesn't act properly. That taking out, again, I think Floyd said a lot more eloquently. That again, taking her shame and turning it into this is definitely the way we gotta read it. And yeah, I just want to leave you with, we're not done, we're going to read a little bit more, but I will tell you this. These are not great solutions. These are not we have better solutions today for infertility. But some of you know this story, and some of you have heard part of the story. I will just say this. Um, you know, when you read the text and when you read parts of the Torah and you've changed, you you that's part of what makes this amazing, the whole level of what you bring to the text. So for my whole life, I read this story and it's just a story of weird dysfunction, family dysfunction, and people dealing with God and all the stuff we've talked about. But about 5 years ago, this hit home because, as a lot of you know, I discovered in that's now 6 years ago, 7 years ago, that I have an aunt through 23andMe. She discovered that she was my mom's half sister. Was 5 years younger than my mom. She grew up in Chicago at the same time. And we don't know exactly how this went into effect, but essentially, my grandfather was her dad, and her father worked with my grandfather. Her mother and father couldn't have kids. And what it seems to be is that either this was a consensual agreement. I don't know what the physical or organization of this was. And this we're talking about was in 1950. So this woman is now 76 years old. She was conceived essentially as a surrogate, and she didn't know it until she was 70 years old. She found out at 70 that her father wasn't her real father, that it was my grandfather. And we have no idea what the arrangement is other than her father and my grandfather were both scientists who worked together. University of Minnesota and then University of Chicago. I don't know what the arrangement was. I don't know. Again, we have no idea. She didn't even know that the guy that she thought her dad was not her dad until she did a DNA test that said she was 65% Ashkenazi. And she went to her mother, who was in her 90s and was already suffering with dementia, and said, "Hey, is my dad? What was my dad?" And she said, "I can't remember his name, but he was a scientist, and I have it written down here," and found my grandfather's name. The fact that I have a personal experience with a story like this is crazy. It also, again, like, it, you don't know how the text is going to affect you until you go through certain things in life and you're like, yeah, people do some really, really wild stuff. And I'm not talking about 1500 BCE. I'm talking about 1950. So yeah, it's an amazing story. It's one that I've talked about a little bit, but when I read the story of surrogacy, I can't not think about that story. And the fact that this woman, who my sister was just in Tucson last week visiting her daughter who goes to the University of Arizona, she had lunch with our new aunt Belinda, and we stay in contact with her. And she never had children herself. She never had any siblings, any other siblings, and yeah, I mean we're now she has a family. So yeah, you never know how a text is going to affect you. But yeah, this story of Hagar is a pretty wild text. And again, there's a lot of lessons in that story that I discovered, this new story that I discovered. And a couple of years ago, when we took her to Israel, some of you were on that trip and met her. in person, it's still, I don't believe it. Like, still, there's a level of me that says this is not real. Um, and yeah, I think about this, and our ancestor Abraham, yeah, I don't have to go back further than my grandfather to know that this stuff happens, and that some people never tell the story. I mean, that's the takeaway in that one was sometimes there's never a, I don't know that my grandmother ever knew. I mean, my grandmother died 2008, so she died almost 20 years ago. I would have wanted to know whether she knew that my grandfather did this. I mean, my grandfather and my grandmother were divorced when my mom was 8, and he was a horrible person, by the way. I have no issue saying that publicly, that he was not a good person. And I always wondered how my mom didn't have other siblings that she didn't know about. It turned out she did. But he was not a good person. He was not a good man. I actually told Belinda that when I first met her. I said, it's a good thing you didn't know my grandfather because he was not a good person. He was not a, did not, I would say he was probably not diagnosed as a sociopath, but was not a good person. And and the best thing he did was leave my mom when she was 8 and really not have anything more to do with her. I met my grandfather probably 5 or 6 times, maybe 10 times. He was at my bar mitzvah. He did come to my wedding. He would make appearances, but he didn't really. He was not a good guy. But I remember telling Belinda when I first met her, I said, "It's a good thing you didn't know this guy. It's a good thing that you didn't ever meet him. He wasn't a good person." And she said to me, "You didn't know my dad." And I didn't get that far into it because her dad also left her life when she was a kid. Uh, you know, what you think is the worst sometimes isn't the worst. So yeah, these stories they change depending on where you are in life, right? You don't think that this story is necessarily going to resonate that way with you, but I can't read this without thinking about people trying to have kids and what the ramifications are when people did this. What was the relationship like? Was it just a business transaction in that case? Was it a what did Avram think was going on here? Did he ever care whether he spent any time with Hagar after the kid was born? I don't know. I don't know, but I do think about it now.
Maybe that's not the point of it. Maybe the point of it is God to saying, I know everybody, you know, well, if he knows if God is God, right, then and the people put God on this pedestal. He's trying to say, don't put him on that pedestal. Okay, I did some good things, the world, the water, everything, but the woman's a bit more complicated emotionally and physically, and there should be no shame in this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's deeper. Like I'm saying, it's got there's this stuff is deep. This deep stuff. And so he knew thousands of years later, right, that women are going to be going through this process and they're going to be looking back at these texts, and that's what they should be taking from this. There's no shame in this. This is the beginning of our lineage, and we're
Yep.
running into this.
And
I don't know.
every human being that tries to make their way through the world, but man, oh man, I can't read the story of Agar without thinking about Belinda and the fact that she spent 40 years, 45 years working for USAID, traveled all around the world as a lawyer to try to help make the world a better place, like literally doing nothing but going to places like Yemen or Morocco or all over the world to try to help the United States help impoverished countries try to, yeah. But yeah, it wouldn't have existed unless there was some crazy surrogate arrangement, years ago. But look, we wouldn't be here. Yeah. None of us would be here if it wasn't for these people, for all their faults. And again, in this moment right here, Sarai is not acting, she's not acting very nice. I mean,
Rabbi, is the synonym in English for the word bosom in Hebrew, is it chest or is it heart?
let me see. Um, Um, no,
Is
it's like it's like um um chest. It's not hard.
okay, but it seems like that's when we're looking at the, no pun intended, heart of the relationship. Um, this line is pretty critical. I put myself, I myself put my maid in your bosom. It maybe she's saying heart. I if that's part of the terrible thing for her.
Well, yeah, listen, I love that interpretation, and I think it's probably more of a modern interpretation because we want. But again, I said there's ancient midrash that Avram and Sarai, I mean that Avram and Hagar come back together. So it's not like they didn't want this to be a love story in the ancient world, but there is this, I think today, this understanding too of we want to know what was the emotional connection like here.
Right. I mean, there's obviously a physicality and there's an emotionality of the word bosom, and it's at least in modern English.
Yes, and I would say this though, if Avram is still, if he had feelings of affection for her, which again the tradition definitely allows for, if he then turns around and says, "Look, it's up to you. You do what you want to do," at the very least, he's 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 not doing anything, and maybe he's also going against his own heart by just simply telling his wife, "Hey, this is your call. You do what you want." But the interesting thing, of course, is he never says, "Wait a second. I only did what you told me to do," because the text says that it was her idea. So it's not like they agreed to it. It doesn't say that, they had a conference about it. It says that Sarah told him to do it, and, you know, and he listened to her, which means he followed her direction. All right, so we're gonna we're gonna wrap up there because the next part is the story of Hagar, and we will read versions of this next week about Hagar and Ishmael, which in itself is a whole nother can of worms. One that, as I said, we're still dealing with today to some extent. Um, and we'll talk about Hagar and Ishmael in the rest of chapter 16. But again, this is when this is all going down. Avram, according to the text, this isn't, well, let's compute how old he is based on what we think he is. The Bible, at least one author, tells us that he's 86 years old when this happens. So just understand that that's what we're also dealing with, which is a man who definitely knows better and has experienced life, seen people, but yeah, he hasn't seen this stuff before. So we're going to read about the fallout from this, and we're probably also going to go into chapter 17 next week too. So yeah, it was emotional for me too. I don't know why. I don't know why. Probably because the first time that I've actually done that text while in a where we really talked about that surrogacy thing um in a group. But yeah, that was that's my mid rush. Anyways, so thank you everybody for being here. Tomorrow night we have our Jewish journey. We're going to be looking in the next couple weeks. We're going to be kind of we talked about Jewish history 2 weeks ago in Europe. We're going to be talking about the Shoah, the Holocaust, in a little bit more depth. We talked about it when we did the Jewish history overview, but again, kind of in honor of this time of year of Yom HaShoah and in the time of at a time when Holocaust studies and the discussion about the Shoah is even more important. Again, John and Glory shared with me a film that their friends are working on, their friend Renee is working on another film about the Shoah, specifically about telling the story about the archives and about the way that we are preserving the history of the Shoah. So again, tomorrow night would say that, and then next week we're going to be talking about the Shoah. So and the fact that we live in a time where people are very much denying the historical facts, and um, this work is even more important for us to be knowledgeable and for us to bear witness. So, folks, we'll see you in the coming days. And again, thank you everybody for being here, dedicating today to those who lost their lives in Israel over the last years, and hopefully that they won't have to do it again. But all right, take care, everybody. Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank
We'll
you,
see you. Safe
Rabbi.
travels back.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey.